Hey, well, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today, and thank you to the organizers of Drupal Flyover Camp. I'm really excited to be here and to be presenting on the topic of incident management, specifically how your teams can harness change and respond to disruption in ways that are overall effective and efficient. My name is Megan Davis, and I'm a senior project manager and a team lead with Palantir.net. I've been with Palantir for about 2.5 years now, and I'm based out of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And at Palantir, I manage large portfolios and projects that range across several industries, from healthcare to education. And I also help to define the best practices that we use within project management. I've been on several teams where we've experienced incidents, and based on a series of best practices, I've developed some effective plays that we use at Palantir when we experience times of disruption on a project. And these plays allow us to respond faster, collaborate overall more efficiently, and to iterate on and refine our process. They also allow the teams and team members to learn and grow, both as individuals, at the team level, and then at the organization level. These series of plays that I'm describing are what I'm here to share with you today. So we'll start today's session by taking a look at some of the foundational concepts. Who is this session for, and what is incident management? Beyond that, why do we talk about it, and what's the value of an incident management practice? We'll then transition into the application or the practice of incident management. So how do high-performing teams manage incidents? What are some of the tools and best practices that you can take with you after this session and implement at your company or at the team level? And then finally, how can we continue to learn and grow from an incident? Okay, so diving into these foundational concepts. Who is this session for? Well, this session is for you if you're a member of a team who provides client or customer support or services. If you manage a team that provides client or customer support or services. If you're an Agile practitioner, perhaps you're a project or program manager, or if you're a member of a development or an operations team. Really, this session is for everyone. So what is an incident? When we talk about an incident, we're referring to an event that causes disruption to or reduction in the quality of a service that we provide, and it requires a timely or often a very time-sensitive response. So here's a very tangible, relatable example of an incident. So a few months back, one of the clients I helped manage their portfolio of sites for their healthcare client, all 3 of their hospital sites came down. Now, this is an example of both a client and a customer-facing incident that had a really high impact, particularly given that we were in the midst of a pandemic and those healthcare sites were sharing critical public health information at that time. We knew we had to deal with that incident very quickly. Another example of an incident is perhaps a particular piece of key functionality within a site not working. So your whole site is up, but one sliver of functionality is not working. And while this is certainly a smaller scale than, say, 3 hospital websites going down, you still have to measure the effects of that piece of functionality going down. Take the time to identify the root causes and then get that functionality back up and working. So you can treat this as an incident and apply the incident management play to get that functionality back up and working and keeping your client happy. Now, a third example, this may not be one that you would immediately think of to apply an incident management practice to, but you can. So if a client comes to you requesting, say, several iterations around a particular piece of design, for instance, beyond what was originally scoped, you can treat this as an incident. It has the potential to absolutely balloon your scope, timeline, and budget, and can put the project at risk. So you can apply the incident management play even in a scenario like this, where the client is requesting more iterations than you had even thought of and that you budgeted for. So why do we talk about incident management? Well, for several reasons. To start, incidents are costly. Not engaging in best practices only drives the expense of an incident and makes it more expensive. So in the first example I provided, where 3 healthcare sites came down, had my teammate not raised her hand or waved the flag that she needed help, those sites would have been down for far longer than they were. And that's a cost realized by the client and to their business. Incidents also have the potential to jeopardize you, your team, and your company's reputation, and that in turn impacts customer retention. Customer retention really is what can keep a company thriving. It's those clients that keep coming back for more and more work with you. But customer retention hinges on open and honest communication and trust, which are also foundational for incident management. And then finally, incidents that are handled poorly are wildly disruptive to your team. They have the potential to steer all attention away from the work and towards the incident in a way that's not productive and is expensive for your clients. So, acknowledging what's at risk with poor incident management, here are some of the benefits of having a solid and well-executed incident management play that you can draw on. First, you'll see an overall increase in collaboration. The process that we'll go through is inclusive of stakeholders' opinions, and it encourages the meaningful participation of team members to solve a problem. Next, you'll see that there's more direct communication, both with your client and internally with your project team. Clear, concise, empathetic, and most importantly, relevant messages and communication help to build that client trust and that loyalty, because they become informed more quickly on the progress you're making towards resolving an incident. And internally, on your own project team, direct, concise communication helps to provide a shared understanding of who is doing what and when. Next, trust is built. Individuals on your team can trust that their teammates and their colleagues will perform their assigned duty during any incident response. Team members are empowered to jump in, perhaps embrace a break in process if the unexpected occurs. And then what we'll see when we talk about the reflection portion of incident management is that this play encourages honesty and openness. It allows team members to raise their hand or wave a flag when they see that something has gone awry and it needs to be fixed as soon as possible. Okay, so now that we've covered the foundational kind of core concept of incident management, Let's see what it looks like in practice. So the second portion of this presentation will be framed as a timeline of events. We'll walk through the moments when you perhaps discover an incident. We'll cover the process through which you can act and kind of adopt principles of effective collaboration and communication to get to the point where you'll resolve the incident. And finally, again, I think this is perhaps the most important, though often forgot portion of incident management is the reflection portion. We'll walk through how you and your team can meaningfully reflect on an incident in a way that assures you have a path forward to try to not make the same mistake twice. So let's dive into the discovery portion. There are a few different ways that you'll detect an incident. Never the optimal way, but it happens. A customer or a client could sound the alarm. You may get that email from a client saying, hey, my websites are down, what's happening? That's one way of detecting an incident, though again, it is never optimal. I've also experienced where a client or a customer files a JIRA ticket or may casually mention that a piece of functionality is not working on a call. Generally, what I've experienced is that they may not realize the impact or the severity of that piece of functionality being down. But if you dig deeper, sometimes you'll find that there is an incident there. Third, the monitoring of systems, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, but the site goes down, you get an automatic email saying that the site, while it's being monitored, is currently down. That's perhaps the easiest way of recognizing an incident. Fourth, a teammate could make an observation or flag something in Slack or email. This is the way that I've experienced most incidents come to light, where a teammate feels empowered to raise their hand and kind of break process and say something is not right, we need to talk through this. And that's one way of initiating the incident management play. And then finally, another example of how you may discover an incident is a teammate could mention that they're experiencing challenges or blockers in their work. Sometimes it'll come up on Scrum where it's phrased as a blocker, and the more questions that you're able to ask, you sometimes find that there's an incident that they're trying to resolve and may need help with. Okay, so we're at the point where you recognize there's an issue. Either your client has reached out or a teammate has posted something in Slack that may suggest that there's an issue or an incident. What you do next is what can make or break a high-performing team. Truly, the keystone of incident management is open, honest, frequent communication. And in order to create a safe space for that type of communication to happen, there has to be a shared understanding across everyone that every company and every project team will experience an incident at one point or another. Once we acknowledge that everyone will have an incident at some point in their career, they may have multiple, you can then transition into identifying the tools that you'll need to successfully implement the incident management practice. The mindset when you're thinking through the tools that you need, that you should be in, is really share what you know and keep the client first. So here are a few examples of the tools that we use at Palantir. So to ensure that we have this open environment that's really collaborative and where people can communicate across either several planes or several teams, we use a handful of tools. So the first is we use a messaging tool, Slack, and we create project channels within that where we can talk to our project teams. There's then also a company-wide channel where everyone in the company is part of that specific channel. You'll definitely have a client communication tool. You want to make sure that the client is always informed with the most up-to-date information of how you're handling the incident. We oftentimes rely on email, but you can also pick up the phone during an incident and let them know over the telephone what is happening. And sometimes that's personal and well received. You'll also need some sort of shared collaboration space where you can provide live updates. Now, we'll talk about this a bit later, but the tools that we use at Palantir is a combination of Google Docs and Atlassian's Confluence. Then finally, video chat. If you're working remotely, is particularly important. You're going to want to hop on a call together to troubleshoot until a resolution is found. You'll want to be able to talk, troubleshoot, and share your screens back and forth, generally via Zoom or Google Meet. So we're at the stage now where a question, a disruption, or a request has come in. The person who's receiving this disruption should notify the full project team. Every single individual on your team should be empowered to not only raise their hand, but feel responsible to raise their hand if they hear or notice something that's gone wrong or is a potential incident. At Palantir, this likely would happen over Slack. So we would use the @here and may choose to include leadership if there's a close working relationship with the client. But we would definitely use Slack to notify the full project team. If we can't get a hold of them, hop on the telephone. Before you put this play into practice at your company, I would encourage you to share it with leadership and gain an understanding of who from leadership would want to be notified or would need to be notified if an incident arose. So take that step to validate who you might need to notify within your company. And then hop on a video chat. You're going to want to start talking, sharing your screen, troubleshooting, and organizing with your team as soon as possible. Then take the steps to determine your incident team. This is fully based off of what you're trying to solve for. So not every person from the project team will be a member of the incident team. The incident team could also be comprised of people who are not on the project team, such as a sales representative who may have had a close relationship with the client in the sales process. To start, think through what areas of the project are impacted. Again, the areas that are impacted are what will drive who is involved on the incident team. So thinking back to the examples I provided earlier, the first incident where 3 sites came down, we had the lead engineer, the project advocate, who's a senior leader assigned to a particular client, and then the project manager at the least. Whereas in the third example, where the client wanted to iterate in the design phase for longer, you may choose to bring in a senior representative or a contracting representative. The person who sold that project may need to be part of the conversation. You may include a project manager to have the conversation around timeline and budget, the product owner, and then the senior designer who's on the project or the lead designer who's on that project. So the incident team will vary depending on what it is that you're trying to solve for. Once you have your incident, once you know which areas of the project are impacted, from that group, you'll determine who's the decision maker. A sensible default or starting point here is that perhaps the project advocate or the senior representative on the project or the product owner would be the decision maker. They take ownership of making the ultimate call in determining the path forward, though this is not done in a silo. You then have the incident manager. This is a role that I've often filled on the projects I'm on as a project manager. The incident manager doesn't have to be a PM, but likely could. But they're responsible for client communications. They're responsible for ensuring transparency around what's happening with your team, with stakeholders. So they're really shepherding this process through. Next, you determine who will be consulted and who will be informed. This is really the crucial conversation that you're going to have with your team, because it will determine kind of what stream of work a teammate is progressing with. Will they be part of the incident team, or will they be working on something else? An example of someone who may be consulted might be a lead engineer, a team member, a developer who is working on something, a designer who is working on a particular piece of work that may be impacted by the incident. It could also be company management or leadership. So the role that those who will be consultees provide is really to help make recommendations to the decision maker based on their area of expertise. So they may be called on to provide some expertise and help the decision maker arrive at a final resolution. Anyone who's not a decision maker, not the incident manager, and isn't consulted is someone who's informed. They learn of the outcome of the incident and are generally in a place where they're taking in information rather than providing it. Next, you do want to determine who's going to manage client communications and keep the client informed. If you're the incident manager, it's likely that you'll be the person doing that, but you may have a second person. Let's say there's a senior representative or a member of leadership on your project where you collaborate on the client comms, but you do want to identify under which role that responsibility will fall. And then once you have all these roles identified, communicate them out clearly to your entire project team. There should be no one who has a question on if they're involved and in what way. People should very clearly know what role they're playing during an incident. Those who aren't members of the incident team are not brought into the decision-making process or even the discussion meetings. So you're not going to have likely your full project team on these kind of troubleshooting calls. This allows team members to progress with meaningful work, kind of on a different work stream that will advance the project and continue to add value to the client if it's available. Those who are not on the incident team, again, are working on meaningful pieces of work, even if it's determined in a just-in-time fashion. So an example may be if they pick up one ticket and then they check in 4 hours later to pick up the next ticket. If there's no work that can be pulled by a team member, the decision maker should be aware of that because it could impact the resolution and it could inform the process and path forward. So that's really good information to provide to the decision maker. So to combat the potentially stressful nature of managing an incident, I've kind of arrived at using an incident status page. When you do this, you want to log the incident on the status page. I immediately will share it out with the team, add it to Confluence, even if the incident is not fully understood at the time. You log the the most relevant information or all the information you have at that time. You're going to want to stand this up really quickly. So having a template at hand is super helpful. And then once it's stood up, again, share it out. I tend to share it everywhere that I can. So I'll post it and pin it in Slack, add it to Confluence, email it to leadership if needed, but you want to get it out to your internal stakeholders and those who are on the project team, who are on the incident team as soon as possible. So the goal of this document, the goal really is to get the message and the updates out there while still primarily focusing on resolving the issue. So this allows everyone to be in the loop from investigation to resolution without having to be pulled into the call and without being pulled into the decision-making process. The status page should take less than 5 minutes to generate. Again, set up a template and add it to a project space so that you can just copy it and have it stood up quickly. The status page is intended really to serve a role being iterated on with a focus of getting the document out first and improving later. I have to say, when I'm the incident manager, honestly, sometimes this doc is like riddled with spelling mistakes, but the goal is to get it out there. I can fix the spelling mistakes after. Oftentimes stuff is moving so quickly and you're logging stuff every few minutes. Focus on getting the information in there and refining it later. Do aim for clear, plain language. You really shouldn't have to read between the lines or read lengthy documents to understand what's going on. Or if you're, say, leadership, when you may expect that the incident is resolved. As a PM, I find I'm often the bridge between developers and the client. So if there's something that I don't understand that I'm logging in a status page, I do make sure to ask for clarity around this and prevent the team from moving so fast that the status page is lagging behind it. The goal of this is to increase the level of clarity, and you do that by writing in clear, plain language. Next, you're going to want to update it with frequent, honest, brief updates. This is the one place where you're communicating about the incident. You're not digging through emails. You shouldn't be going through Slack. This is the one place where the incident is being managed and captured. Now, when you start an incident, you want to start at the bottom and then work your way up. So you log the incident, and then the investigating or the moment when you notice an incident moves to the bottom of the page, and you add the most relevant information on top of that. The idea is that, say this takes you 4 hours to resolve an incident. If someone looks at that status page, they can easily, at the top of the page, see the most up-to-date information and really not have to scroll all the way to the bottom to do that. Every update that I provide on a status page, and this was just like a helpful, handy tip that I kind of came across, was I always add the date and then the time in my time zone, because I'm watching the clock and I don't want to have to calculate back and forth what my client's time zone is. And then I'll retroactively go and add their time zone. But I tabulate everything in my own time zone and from the bottom of the page upwards. After you have your status page up, you're going to want to engage in the advice process. Now, what does this mean? This is the point where the decision maker is seeking out various perspectives. Prior to forming a proposal or a resolution, the decision maker is seeking out information and perspectives from various people, likely those that you identified as consultees. They gather advice from anyone who's meaningfully impacted by the by the incident, or could hold subject matter expertise. The seeking of the collective wisdom around you really is in the pursuit of arriving at a sound decision. So that's the ultimate goal, is to gather all the information at the right time to make the right decision. From there, the decision maker will form a written proposal. This is really their call on how to move forward. The decision maker is in the role where they are responsible for making the call based on all the information. So they are the ones who are responsible for that proposal on how it gets resolved. They're also responsible for upholding transparency during incidents. So once they arrive at a written proposal, it should be shared. Okay, so we have a written proposal. We're ready to move into the resolution phase. Once you've arrived at the resolution of how you're resolving this incident, you want to add it in to your status page. So you can see here that we have a brief summary of the incident, almost always written after the incident, actually always written after the incident is resolved. And then you have the resolution. So how did we move out of this time-sensitive moment of being in an incident? You summarize it there. And then you gotta close communications and tie up the loose ends. I generally will circulate, once an incident is resolved, I'll generally circulate the status page if I'm the one who wrote it. I'll note anywhere where I had questions or tag someone if I need them to validate that I got something right, that I understood it correctly, because that becomes a source of truth for your timeline. So once it's been resolved by the team, gaps are filled in, everything's validated, all your spelling errors are corrected, it's time for the incident manager to write the incident report. And again, this is in plain language. The incident report will contain a summary, a timeline where you can pick up your status page information and really move that over into the report, the root cause analysis and recommendations. So you're capturing what happened, why it happened, and how we moved out of it. You may consider sharing this report with your clients, or you could have an internal report and a client-facing report. You'll want to share it with your project team, any key stakeholders, and I would encourage sharing it with your whole company. The reason why it's valuable to share with your company, though it may feel uncomfortable when you come out of an incident, is again, going back to that mindset that every company and every project at some point will experience an incident. It's all about how you handle it and what you learn from it. So if sharing out your incident report could help the next person, it's worth it. Once I share the incident report with a client, I always offer to hop on a brief call if they need clarification or want to talk anything through. Here's an example of the incident report. So we have the summary, a timeline, here's a root cause analysis, followed by Palantir's recommendations. I do store all the documents together somewhere where we can easily find them and reference them for future projects. This is an example of where I stored something in Confluence within a project. So it captures a link to the status page, the post-mortem, which we'll discuss, if there was any sort of debrief with the client, and then the internal incident reports and the client communication that may have followed it. Okay, so you've resolved the incident. You've closed up communications with your client, with your internal team, and you understand why the incident happened. You'll now want to round out your practice of incident management by running a blameless post-mortem workshop to decrease the chance that this error might happen again. I find that this is often the step. If a company has an incident management process, this fourth and final phase is often the one that's forgotten or not enough time is dedicated to, but it's perhaps the most important. Running a blameless postmortem and reflecting on what happened encourages support and collaboration across your team. It fosters team communication and openness. It also increases the chance that next time a teammate may come forward earlier or more with more voice if they recognize an incident. And then finally, running a blameless postmortem and reflecting on what happened supports a growth mindset that your team can learn from the disruption, move forward, and improve together. It really is a learning opportunity. The blameless postmortem provides the team the opportunity to stop, to breathe, and to reflect on the incident. I find that oftentimes the team will want to step away for a bit from an incident once it's resolved to kind of, either get lunch or do something, but you don't want to let the blameless postmortem get so far out from the incident that context is lost, or you want to do the blameless postmortem when the incident is fresh on everyone's mind. So together, you'll identify things that worked well, what didn't work well, and things that the team might want to improve on. It's likely that you'll need an hour, possibly 2, depending on the severity of the incident. And you'll probably want to get a facilitator for the session. It can be someone within your company or a colleague. But if you're a project manager and you were part of the incident management team, and you typically find that you're the facilitator for these sessions, you may want to step back from the facilitator role and let someone else step in who wasn't part of the incident. You're going to have stuff that you want to share, and it's a whole lot easier to do when you're not the facilitator. So as a team, you're going to reflect on what happened, why it happened, examine how the team responded, identify what can be done to prevent the incident from happening again, and then identify ways that you can improve your future response. So if we do have an incident moving forward, what's something that we may want to change in our process, if anything, to become a more nimble, agile team? Always begin with the assumption that team members acted from a place of good intent. Everyone was working from a place of good intent during an incident. Keep communication fact-based, honest, and objective, and then document this in a shared space. And we use compliments. I again encourage you to consider sharing your learnings and what you took out of this blameless postmortem, not only with your project team, but with those across your discipline and within the whole company. Again, this fosters an environment of learning. So it's not about failure. The focus is on learning and moving forward in a meaningful way. You may learn that the way you handled the incident went very well, or you'll likely learn that you need to iterate on the process further, refining it, ironing out the wrinkles, and that's okay. Don't worry if that's what you discover. It actually will only serve you well in the long run. So running an incident management play is a skill that can be acquired and refined over time, but it takes intention. You have to start doing it. and it takes practice. So I encourage you to practice this a number of times. Even if you're dealing with an incident that you perceive as being very small, try to apply the play and test it out so that when something bigger happens, you're ready. Share it out with your teammates, your colleagues, and know that with this play in hand, you're prepared for whatever comes your way. And when you improve this play, as I'm sure will happen, I encourage you to share it back with the whole community. Thank you. I'm open to any questions.
Yeah, so Garrett has a question. Go ahead and start with his. So what is a good way to get everyone to prioritize postmortems? In the past, these types of meetings are continually pushed or disregarded by people that feel like we need to be there but don't feel obligated to be.
That's a really good question. Oftentimes I'm the one adding it to the calendar, and to be honest, I just watch to see if a teammate has declined the invitation. When they decline it, I'll prompt a conversation, and it's usually explaining the value of why we do a retrospective. And again, focusing on the learning aspect of it, not dwelling on like, we did something wrong. We're coming out of it to be stronger as a team, and you really need your full incident team there for it to work really well. So yeah, I think, like I said, I add the meeting to everyone's calendar and I watch to see if anyone declines. That's then a one-on-one conversation of like, oh, I see you declined. Is this not a good time for you, or is there another reason? And that prompts a conversation. I think also having a retro, if you can reframe retros from being the time when, you know, people kind of just get stuff off their chest to being goal oriented, there's also value there. So it's not the time to, you know, get stuff off your chest. It's like, how do we move together as a productive team? And we're all one and we're all supporting each other. And I find that reframing, when it's goal-oriented, helps teammates like become more engaged with a retrospective.
Yeah. So Laura's question, in your experience, do you think the use of incident pages have increased your client's trust? It's often hard to communicate incidents that have extremely technical language. I found this can cause confusion and result in a lack of confidence. And status pages and reports would be a very good way to lay everything out clearly.
Yeah, another great question. I found that I've actually stopped sharing the incident status page with the client and instead use that as a space where like the whole team is getting oriented on what's happening. We're working through stuff, and in a separate document, if I'm the incident manager, I'm working on a client communication that can be reviewed and sent out. So when we hit, because sometimes like you're in this state of troubleshooting for a few minutes, and oftentimes that can just raise the anxiety of a client. So I don't share the incident status page with a client. I generally will let the team all work there and like get our bearings on what's happening, how we're going to move forward, what we're doing, and have that be a safe space while I'm working on client communications in plain language in another doc that can be validated and sent out. I find the same with the incident report of like the incident status page really is the backbone of like how we're capturing all the information and what's happening. And from there, I can draw from it. As long as it's accurate and it's up to date, I can draw from it, do client communications, or I can draw from it and do the incident report all in plain language. Yep.
So Eric's question, how has the pandemic changed how you hold a post-mortem? Our company pivoted from being mostly in the office to mostly remote for the time being. So for companies that aren't used to working remotely first, yeah, how do you do a good post-mortem or retro?
That's a good question. So I've only ever really worked remotely. So my experience is running retros entirely virtually. And I think, again, it goes back to framing. So I always begin a retrospective with a handful of, reminders of like, this is, I think I had it in the deck, like, let me see. Yeah, so we're keeping communication fact-based and objective. We're all here to learn from one another. We're in this together. I found that my language around the pandemic and postmortems changed slightly because people were at a heightened stress level, understandably, with everything that we were going through. So it was the way that I framed retros was always, we are all in this together. We are learning from one another, and we're moving forward together. And that shift, I think, was really important for people of like, we're not looking to point fingers ever. We're here to learn from one another and to improve and to serve our client. And actually at the end of sprint-based retros, oftentimes at a postmortem, I would do this also, but like we'll identify 2 to 3 goals that we want to work on. So based on what we heard in the retro, what are the goals that we want to work on in the next 2 weeks, in the next month? And that's a really effective way to channel people's energy into thinking as a team and less as individuals. It's gotten a lot of really good feedback, shifting to a goal-oriented retrospective, because you feel like you're walking away with something tangible rather than feeling the goal is never to make anyone feel bad, but like they're walking away with something tangible. Yep. Yeah, and even managing, there was even a shift, like I said, I've always been virtual, but once the pandemic hit, people were at a heightened sense of stress, as you said, in extraordinary ways. And so my language completely shifted to being goal-oriented, to being, we are all in this together. Nothing that comes out of this rests on any one person's shoulders. Like, and I still say that to this day. It's really built teams, especially when we're all virtual and stressed.
I have a question that's not a whole paragraph long like everyone else's. It's just how small of an incident or like how large does an incident have to be before you do this? I mean, because there's always little hiccups, or things during a project. So what is kind of that minimum threshold before you would say this is an incident? Start taking this approach.
Sure. That's a good question. I'm not sure I have an entirely solid answer on it, but my gut would be, so there's a difference between a risk and an incident. A risk is something you can see coming down the road. You can plan for it. You can work to mitigate it. An incident is like a moment that you're in. If you have that gut feeling of like, we're in something right now, this is time sensitive and we need to figure out how to resolve it, likely you're going to need to run the incident management play. And it's another good way to practice it, I think, even if it's something small. But typically if it's something that my gut is telling me, like this has to be resolved now, then I apply the incident play. And it could be just a shortened version of it. It could be just the status page, no incident report. Like you take from it what you need. But yeah, I hope that's an okay answer. I think it's just like the gut feeling of like, this has to be resolved now. Then you would use the incident management play. But again, take from it what you need. If it's just a status page, I think that's helpful as well.
Yeah, so if there's not any more questions, thank you very much, Megan. This has been great.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining me. I really appreciate it.